A ristra of dried chilies hung from the ceiling beams of a kitchen in Tucson, Arizona in 1974. It belonged to a woman named Donna Margarita. Every fall, she bought 200 pounds of green chilies from a farmer in Hatch, roasted them over an open flame in her backyard, and strung them up to dry for the entire year. Her grandchildren remember the smell filling the whole block. That ristra is connected to number 7 on this list. Number 14 uses a chili preparation so old it predates the Spanish by centuries. Number 20 requires an ingredient your abuela made from scratch, but you have probably never seen outside a jar. These 25 recipes were built around the chili. Not the spice rack version, the real thing. Dried, roasted, soaked, ground, and turned into meals that fed families on almost nothing. Hit that subscribe button. Here are 25 forgotten Mexican chili recipes from the 1970s nobody makes anymore. Number 25. Chile pasado. In the northern deserts of Chihuahua, families used to roast green chilies over mesquite fires, peel them by hand, and hang them on clotheslines to dry in the sun for days. The result was chile pasado, leathery, smoky, and concentrated in flavor. You soaked a handful in hot water for 20 minutes, chopped them up, and fried them with onion, garlic, and a little tomato. That was the whole dish. Some families added scrambled eggs. Some stirred in shredded beef left over from the day before. A bag of chile pasado cost almost nothing to make because the chilies came from your own garden or a neighbor's harvest. By the 1980s, freezers replaced clotheslines. Families stopped drying chilies because they could freeze them instead. The flavor wasn't the same. Chile pasado had a depth that freezing couldn't preserve, a smokiness that came from sun and wind and time. Families in Chihuahua and southern New Mexico still remember it. Most of their grandchildren do not. Number 24. Chile Colorado. This was the red chile stew that defined northern Mexican cooking for generations. Dried red chiles, usually guajillo or New Mexico chiles, soaked in hot water, blended into a smooth paste with garlic and cumin. You browned chunks of cheap beef in lard, poured the chili paste over the meat, and simmered it on low heat for 2 or 3 hours until the beef fell apart with a fork. A pound of stewing beef cost 89 cents in 1974. The dried chiles cost even less. The whole pot fed a family of 6 for 2 nights. In the border towns of El Paso and Juarez, Chile Colorado was what you ate on Tuesday when nobody had planned dinner. It didn't require a recipe. Every woman in the neighborhood made it a little different. Some added potato, some added a pinch of cinnamon, but the base was always the same: red chilies, cheap beef, and thyme. She did not need a cookbook for this one. She had been watching her own mother make it since she was tall enough to reach the stove. Number 23. Chile con carne a la antigua. Before chili became a Texas football food, it was something else entirely. In the 1880s, women in San Antonio set up tables in Military Plaza after dark, built charcoal fires, and sold bowls of chili con carne for a few cents each. They were called the Chili Queens. Now, their recipe had no beans, no tomato, and no ground beef. It was chunks of beef shoulder simmered in a paste of dried ancho and pasilla chiles with oregano, cumin, and garlic. By 1943, the health department shut down the Chili Queens for good. The recipe survived in Mexican-American kitchens for decades after that. Your abuela made it with whatever dried chilies she had, a cheap cut of meat, and a heavy pot. By the late 1970s, canned chili had replaced it in most homes. The original version took 3 hours. The canned version took 3 minutes. That was enough to kill it. The women who had carried that recipe across the border weren't trying to make history. They were trying to eat. Number 22. Rajas con crema. This was a simple dish. Roasted poblano peppers, cut into strips, simmered in cream with a little onion and corn kernels. In the 1970s, a pound of fresh poblano chiles cost about 30 cents at the mercado. The cream came from a neighbor who kept a cow or from a small dairy that sold it in glass bottles. You roasted the poblanos directly on the burner of a gas stove, peeled off the blistered skin, sliced them into strips, and cooked them in the cream until everything melted together. It was served with warm tortillas. Nothing else. Rajas con crema was what your abuela made when she wanted something quick, and the garden had too many peppers. It worked as a side dish, a taco filling, or a meal by itself when money was tight. The fresh, roasted flavor of those poblanos made the whole kitchen smell like fall. Your abuela never called it a recipe. She called it rajas, and that was all anyone needed to say. Number 21, Chile Caribe salsa. In northern New Mexico, families crushed dried red chilies by hand into coarse flakes they called Caribe. You put the flakes in a bowl, poured boiling water over them, added raw garlic and salt, and let it sit for 10 minutes. That was the salsa. No blending, no cooking, no tomato. Just crushed chile, water, garlic, and salt. It went on everything. Eggs in the morning, beans at lunch, meat at dinner. A jar of chile Caribe sat on every table in every kitchen in Chimayo, Espanola, and Truchas. The chiles came from family plots that had been growing the same varieties for 400 years. Chimayo chile was different from hatch chile, smaller, thinner, and more complex in flavor. Families passed their seeds down like heirlooms. By the 1990s, fewer families grew their own. The Caribe jars started disappearing from kitchen tables. Store-bought red pepper flakes aren't the same thing. Number 20, chiles toreados. This was the easiest chile recipe in any Mexican kitchen. You took fresh serrano or jalapeno peppers, threw them whole into a hot skillet with a little oil, and blistered them on every side until the skin charred and they softened. Then you squeezed lime juice over them, sprinkled coarse salt, and served them alongside whatever else was on the table. The name came from the word torear, to fight a bull, because eating them was a battle. In the 1970s, a pile of fresh serranos cost 5 or 10 cents. Every taqueria along the border served a plate of chiles toreados with your order, no charge. Your abuela kept a bag of serranos in the kitchen and blistered a few every time she cooked. It took less than 5 minutes. The heat was unpredictable. One pepper was mild. The next one made your eyes water. That was part of the tradition. She did not warn you which ones were hot. She just watched you eat and laughed when you reached for the water. Number 19, chile relleno de picadillo. Most people today think of chile rellenos stuffed with cheese. That wasn't how your abuela made them in the 1970s. She stuffed them with picadillo, ground beef cooked with tomato, onion, raisins, almonds, and a pinch of cinnamon. The chilies were fresh poblanos, roasted and peeled, then carefully filled with the sweet and savory meat mixture. She dipped each one in egg batter, whipped until the whites were stiff and foamy, and fried them in a shallow pool of oil until golden. A dozen chile rellenos de picadillo cost less than $2 to make in 1975. The preparation took an entire afternoon. Roasting the chilies, making the picadillo, whipping the eggs by hand, frying each one individually. This wasn't fast food. This was a Saturday project. Families gathered in the kitchen. Grandmothers directed, daughters learned. The tradition lived in the making of it, not just the eating. By the 1980s, restaurants had replaced picadillo with plain cheese because it was cheaper and faster. The relleno survived. The filling did not. What disappeared was not a recipe. It was an afternoon. It was generations standing in the same kitchen, passing the same skills from one pair of hands to the next. She did not measure anything. She tasted as she went. She adjusted by feel. The picadillo was different every time, and it was always right. That kind of cooking can't be written down. It has to be shown. And when the person who showed it is gone, the recipe goes with them. Number 18, mole negro. This was the most difficult sauce in all of Mexican cooking, and the one that separated a good cook from a great one. Mole negro came from Oaxaca. It required more than 30 ingredients: dried chilhuacal, negro chilies, mulatto chilies, ancho chilies, pasilla chilies, sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, almonds, raisins, plantain, chocolate, cinnamon, cloves, oregano, thyme. You toasted each ingredient separately. The chilies were charred almost black. The seeds from inside the chilies were burned on purpose and then soaked to remove the bitterness. The whole process took 2 days. In Oaxacan villages, families brought their toasted ingredients to a communal mill to be ground into paste. A pot of mole negro cost less than $5 to make in 1973, but it required 20 hours of labor. Your abuela served it over turkey for Day of the Dead or a wedding. Nobody made it on a Tuesday. It was the kind of dish that tested your patience and rewarded it tenfold. By the 1990s, families started buying mole paste in jars. The homemade version began to disappear. The jar version was convenient, but it wasn't the same. Number 17. Salsa de chile de árbol. This was the salsa that burned. Chile de árbol is small, thin, and mean. Your abuela toasted a handful of them in a dry skillet until they darkened and the kitchen filled with smoke that made everyone cough. Then she dropped them in the molcajete with roasted garlic, a little salt, and maybe a roasted tomatillo or two. She ground it all by hand into a rough brick red paste. This salsa cost almost nothing. A bag of dried chiles de árbol was 25 cents and lasted weeks. The heat was fierce but clean, and the flavor behind it was nutty and smoky. Every taco stand in every barrio had a version of this salsa. It was free. It was always on the table. In the 1970s, nobody thought of it as a recipe because it was just something that existed, like tortillas or salt. You didn't learn it. You absorbed it. And now that the taco stands have switched to bottled hot sauce, the original salsa de árbol is fading from memory. The molcajete sits in a cabinet. The chiles sit in a bag nobody opens. Number 16. Chilaquiles de chile ancho. Chilaquiles weren't a restaurant dish. They were what your abuela made with yesterday's tortillas, so nothing went to waste. She tore stale corn tortillas into pieces and fried them in a little lard until crisp. Then she poured a sauce of soaked and blended ancho chiles over them, stirred it all together, and let the tortillas soften in the sauce for a few minutes. On top went crumbled queso fresco, a spoonful of crema, and sliced raw onion. Some families added a fried egg. Some added shredded chicken. The ancho chile version was darker, sweeter, and more complex than the tomato-based chilaquiles you find in restaurants today. A plate of chilaquiles de chile ancho cost about 15 cents to make in 1972. It used ingredients that were already in the kitchen: stale tortillas, dried chiles, a little cheese. Nothing was wasted, nothing was bought special. That was the whole point. She turned yesterday's leftovers into this morning's best meal without thinking twice. Number 15. Chile con queso ranchero. Here's the thing. This wasn't the orange dip you get at a Tex-Mex chain. The original chile con queso was made with real cheese and real chiles. Your abuela roasted fresh green chiles, usually poblanos or Anaheims, peeled them, chopped them, and melted them into a pot of queso asadero or queso chihuahua. Maybe she added a little roasted tomato, maybe some diced onion. The cheese was soft, white, and stringy when melted. It cost about 60 cents a pound in the 1970s along the border. The whole dish came together in 15 minutes and was eaten with warm flour tortillas. Nothing else was needed. Chile con queso ranchero was party food and weeknight dinner and after-school snack all in one. It was simple and cheap, and everyone loved it. By the 1980s, Velveeta and Rotel had replaced it in most Mexican-American kitchens. The homemade version with real cheese and fresh roasted chiles quietly disappeared. It was better, but it wasn't as easy, and easy won. Number 14. Pozole rojo de chile guajillo. Pozole is ancient. The Aztecs made a version of it centuries before the Spanish arrived. By the 1970s, it was still the dish that appeared at every celebration in every Mexican and Mexican-American household. The red version, pozole rojo, got its color from dried guajillo and ancho chiles. You soaked the chilies, blended them, and stirred the paste into a pot of simmered pork and hominy. The hominy had been nixtamalized, soaked in lime water the way indigenous people had done it for thousands of years. A whole pot of pozole rojo cost about $2 in 1974 and fed 12 people. It was served with shredded cabbage, sliced radish, dried oregano, and a squeeze of lime. Pozole rojo was a weekend dish, a birthday dish, a New Year's dish. Every family had their version, and every family believed theirs was the best one. Nobody wrote it down because everybody already knew it. But here's the problem. When the grandmothers who carried those recipes passed on, the exact proportions went with them. The next generation guessed, and the guesses weren't quite right. Number 13. Chiles en nogada. This dish was born in Puebla in 1821 to celebrate Mexican independence. Poblano chiles stuffed with a picadillo of pork and dried fruit, covered in a walnut cream sauce, and topped with pomegranate seeds. Green, white, and red, the colors of the Mexican flag. Your abuela only made it once a year, in September, when the walnuts and pomegranates were in season. The walnut sauce required fresh walnuts, peeled one by one, soaked in milk, and blended with cream cheese and a little sugar. The stuffing had pear, peach, apple, raisins, and almonds mixed with the ground pork. The whole dish took a full day to prepare. By the 1980s, most families stopped making it at home because fresh walnuts were hard to find and the preparation was too long. Restaurants in Puebla still serve it during September, but the homemade version your abuela made is mostly gone. The tradition required too many seasonal ingredients and a kind of patience that does not survive modern schedules. Number 12. Adobo de Chile, Colorado. Adobo was the mother sauce of Mexican home cooking. Your abuela made it by soaking dried guajillo and ancho chiles in hot water, then blending them with garlic, vinegar, oregano, cumin, and a pinch of cloves. She rubbed this paste onto pork ribs, chicken legs, or whatever cheap meat she could find and let it sit overnight in the refrigerator. The next day, she slow-cooked the meat in the remaining sauce until it was tender and stained deep red. A batch of adobo paste cost less than 40 cents to make. The dried chilies were the most expensive ingredient, and even those were cheap. The vinegar acted as a preservative, which meant the paste could be stored in a jar for weeks. Your abuela kept a jar of adobo paste in the back of the refrigerator at all times. It went on everything: pork, chicken, beef, even beans. It was the flavor of her kitchen. When you walked through the door, you could smell it before you saw her. That smell was home. Number 11. Chile pasilla salsa negra. Chile pasilla means little raisin, and the name told you everything about its flavor: dark, sweet, fruity, and deep. Your abuela toasted dried pasilla chiles in a skillet until they puffed and turned almost black. She soaked them in hot water, then ground them with roasted garlic and salt into a thick, nearly black salsa. Some families added a roasted onion. Some added a single clove. The salsa went over enchiladas, grilled meat, or fried eggs. A bag of dried pasilla chiles cost 35 cents in 1975 and made enough salsa for a week. This was the salsa your abuela kept in a clay jar on the back of the stove. It deepened with age. By the second day, the flavors had settled into something richer and more complex than the day it was made. This wasn't a salsa you ate for heat. You ate it for depth. The pasilla delivered a flavor that sat in the back of your mouth and stayed there, like a memory you could not quite name but recognized the moment it returned. In Mexican-American kitchens across the Southwest, the clay jar of salsa negra was as common as a salt shaker. It connected the food on the table to a tradition that stretched back centuries, through Oaxaca and Puebla and Michoacán. When your abuela died, the jar went empty. The next generation reached for a bottle instead. The bottle was fine, but it wasn't hers. Number 10. Menudo rojo. Menudo was the dish that fixed everything: a hangover, a cold, a broken heart. Your abuela made it by simmering beef tripe in a broth of dried guajillo and ancho chiles for 4 or 5 hours until the tripe was tender and the broth was deep red and thick. She added hominy halfway through. Dried oregano, diced onion, and a squeeze of lime went on top at the table. A whole pot of menudo cost about $1.50 in 1973. The tripe was the cheapest cut at the carniceria. Nobody else wanted it. That's why Mexican families ate it. In every barrio, menudo was a Saturday night tradition. Your abuela started it in the evening, and it simmered through the night. By Sunday morning, it was ready. Neighbors came, cousins came, everyone brought their own bowl. The pot never seemed to empty. That was menudo. It fed the body, and it fixed whatever else was broken. Your abuela believed in it the way some people believe in medicine. Number 9. Enchiladas de Chile cascabel. Chile cascabel got its name from the rattle sound the dried seeds made when you shook the pepper. It was small, round, and dark. Your abuela toasted them in a dry skillet, soaked them in water, and blended them into a smooth, nutty, slightly smoky sauce. She dipped corn tortillas in the sauce one at a time, filled them with crumbled queso fresco or shredded chicken, rolled them tight, and lined them up in a baking dish. More sauce went on top, more cheese, a few sliced onion rings, into the oven until the edges crisped. These enchiladas tasted nothing like the versions made with canned enchilada sauce. The cascabel gave them a warmth and a roundness that was completely different. A bag of dried cascabel chilies cost about 20 cents in the 1970s. Most Mexican-American groceries carried them. By the 1990s, they were harder to find. The enchilada sauce in a can had already won. Another flavor gone. Another tradition traded for convenience. Number 8. Chile verde con puerco. This was green chile stew with pork, and it was one of the most important dishes in the entire Southwest. Your abuela made it by roasting fresh green chilies over a flame, peeling them and chopping them into chunks. She browned cubes of pork shoulder in lard, added the chilies, diced potato, onion, garlic, and a little water. It simmered for an hour and a half until the pork was tender and the chilies had melted into the broth. In Albuquerque, Tucson, and El Paso, this was the dish you ate in September when the hatch chilies arrived by the truckload. Families bought 40-pound sacks and roasted them in rotating drums in parking lots. The smell of roasting chiles drifted across entire neighborhoods. A pot of chile verde con puerco cost less than $2 and lasted 3 days. It was one of those dishes that tasted better on the second day after the flavors had time to settle and the broth thickened on its own. Number 7. Tamales de Chile Rojo. Tamales were the dish that brought the whole family together. Your abuela started making them at dawn. She soaked dried corn husks in warm water. She spread masa onto each husk, spooned in a filling of shredded pork simmered in red chili sauce, folded the husk, and stacked the tamales upright in a tall steamer pot. The red chili sauce was made from dried guajillo and New Mexico chilies, toasted, soaked, and blended with garlic and cumin. A batch of 60 tamales cost about $4 in 1975. The whole family helped. Aunts, cousins, nieces, daughters. They sat around the kitchen table for hours, spreading mesa, filling, folding, talking. The tamales steamed for an hour and a half, the kitchen filled with a cloud of chile and corn. In the 1970s, every Mexican-American family made tamales at least once a year, usually for Christmas. The tamale-making session, the tamalada, was as much a ritual as the meal itself. It was where your abuela passed down what she knew, not through words, through her hands. She showed you how thick to spread the masa, how to fold the husk so it wouldn't come apart in the steamer. You learned by watching. When your abuela was gone, the tamalada survived in some families. In others, it didn't. The ones who kept it going said it was never about the tamales. It was about sitting together. The tamales were the excuse. The recipe was never written down. It lived in the rhythm of hands that had done it 100 times before. And every Christmas morning, when you peeled back a corn husk and the steam hit your face, you weren't just eating breakfast. You were eating every tamalada your abuela had ever hosted, every story told across that table. The tamale remembered all of it. Every laugh across that table. Every cousin who showed up late and still got put to work. Even if you had forgotten, the tamale had not. Number 6. Salsa borracha. The name means drunken salsa because it was made with pulque, the fermented agave drink that indigenous Mexicans had been making for thousands of years. Your abuela toasted dried pasilla chiles, soaked them, and ground them in a molcajete with roasted garlic, onion, and a splash of pulque. Some families used beer when pulque was not available. The salsa was thick, smoky, and slightly sour from the fermentation. It went over barbacoa, grilled meats, or tacos. In the 1970s, pulque was still sold in neighborhoods with large Mexican populations. A bottle cost almost nothing. By the 1980s, Pulque became harder to find in the United States. Without it, the salsa lost its character. Beer worked, but it wasn't the same. The original salsa borracha had a depth that came from centuries of tradition. It was ancient in a way that most food is not. The kind of recipe that connects you to something older than your family, older than your country, older than the language you speak. Number 5. Chiles chipotles en adobo casero. Before there was a can of chipotles in adobo on every grocery shelf, your abuela made this from scratch. She started with dried chipotle peppers, the smoked and dried version of ripe jalapenos. She simmered them in a sauce of tomato, vinegar, garlic, piloncillo, and a blend of dried chiles, including ancho and guajillo. The whole mixture cooked down slowly until it was thick and dark and sticky. A jar of homemade chipotles and adobo lasted weeks in the refrigerator. It cost less than 50 cents to make in 1976. Your abuela spooned it into beans, stirred it into rice, spread it on sandwiches, or just ate it with tortillas. So the homemade version was smoky, sweet, and tangy in a way the canned version couldn't match. Making it from scratch took patience and time. By the 1980s, the canned version was everywhere. It was good enough. And good enough was all it took to end a tradition. Number 4. Chile ancho relleno de frijol. This was a poor family's dinner, and it was beautiful. Your abuela took dried ancho chiles, soaked them in warm water until they softened, and carefully stuffed them with refried black beans mixed with a little queso fresco. She laid them in a baking dish, poured a thin tomato sauce over the top, and baked them until the cheese melted and the edges of the chiles curled. 2 ancho chiles, a cup of beans, and a handful of cheese. That was it. The whole meal cost less than 30 cents in 1974. The ancho chile was sweet and mild with a flavor like dried fruit. The beans were earthy and rich. Together they made something that tasted far better than the sum of its parts. This was the kind of cooking that nobody documented because it seemed too simple to matter. But it mattered. It fed families when there was nothing else. And it tasted like someone cared enough to make dinner beautiful even when the pantry was almost bare. Number 3. Birria de Chile. Birria originated in Jalisco, and it was always about the chiles. Your abuela used a combination of guajillo, ancho, and chile de árbol, toasted and soaked and blended into a paste with vinegar, garlic, cumin, cloves, oregano, and black pepper. She marinated a cheap cut of beef or goat in this paste overnight, then slow-cooked it in a covered pot for 5 or 6 hours until the meat shredded with a touch. The broth that collected at the bottom was liquid gold, rich, red, fragrant, and deeply spiced. In the 1970s, birria was a celebration dish. Weddings, baptisms, quinceañeras. A whole pot of birria cost about $3 and fed 20 people. The tradition was to serve it with warm tortillas, raw onion, lime, and dried oregano crumbled between your fingers. Your abuela's birria was never the same twice because she adjusted the chiles based on what she had. That flexibility was the recipe. She did not follow instructions. She followed a memory. Number 2. Asado de Chile Colorado. This was the Sunday dinner of northern Mexico. Pork ribs or pork shoulder, simmered in a thick sauce of dried red New Mexico chiles, garlic, and a touch of flour to thicken the gravy. Your abuela browned the meat in a heavy pot, made the chili sauce by soaking and blending the dried pods, combined them, and let it cook low and slow for hours. In Chihuahua and Sonora, this was the dish that marked Sunday. The house smelled like dried chiles and pork fat from morning until the table was set. A pot of Asado de Chile Colorado cost about $1.50 in 1976. The pork ribs were cheap. The dried chiles were cheaper. The flour came from the pantry. Your abuela served it with rice, beans, and a stack of fresh flour tortillas. The gravy soaked into the tortillas and stained your fingers red. That was how you knew it was right. The taste of Sunday, the taste of your abuela's hands on every plate she ever served. Number 1. Chile Atole. This was the drink that nobody outside of Mexican kitchens has ever heard of. Chile Atole was a warm, thick drink made from masa harina, water, and dried red chile. Your abuela dissolved masa in water, stirred in a paste of toasted and blended guajillo or New Mexico chiles, added a pinch of salt, and simmered it until it thickened into something between a soup and a beverage. Some families added a little piloncillo for sweetness. Some kept it savory. A cup of chile atole cost less than a dime to make. It was what your abuela drank on cold mornings when there was nothing else in the kitchen. It was warm, filling, earthy, and spiced. The masa gave it body, the chile gave it heat and depth. In the villages of Zacatecas, Durango, and Chihuahua, chile atole was as common as coffee. Families brought it to the fields. Mothers gave it to children before school. By the time those families crossed into the United States, the tradition was already fading. Their grandchildren drank hot chocolate or coffee. Chile atole became something only the oldest generation remembered. It was the simplest recipe on this list and the one most likely to disappear completely. When it does, something ancient goes with it. Try one of these this week, just one. Make the chile pasado if you can find dried green chilies. Make the salsa de chile de árbol if you have a molcajete collecting dust on your shelf. Make the chile atole on a cold morning and drink it the way your abuela did. Set the table, sit down, eat slow. Because these recipes were never just about the chili. They were about the hands that made them, the kitchens that smelled like toasted peppers and garlic at 6 in the morning. The women who never measured a thing and never got it wrong. Tell me in the comments which recipe your family still makes. Tell me which one you lost. Tell me if your abuela kept a ristra in her kitchen the way Dona Margarita did in Tucson, because these are not just recipes. They are proof that a dried chile, a little water, and a pair of hands that remembered what to do could feed a family, hold a tradition together, and keep something alive that the modern world tried to forget.